Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another Quarantine with Brennifry. As always, I'm Tori. Today, we're talking about the Fox musical animation, Anastasia. And I'm very excited because I really like it. This week, pretty mellow. I mean, kind of mellow until I lost my absolute shit last night. So I've been playing Fire Emblem Three Houses. I beat all of the other paths, right? There's 5 routes or something insane. So anyways, did all of them. I'm on the very last one, which is a split one, right? You have to make a decision, then you can split to the other one. So I'm doing it. I'm 300 and something hours in. I'm all excited. I'm right at the time skip part, or I'm about to get to the time skip part. I'm like, heck yeah, it's going to be so great. I'm having so much fun. I level all these characters up. I'm having a great time. Forgot to talk to the one person during January of the month in the game, and I missed it, so now I have to start over, and I nearly threw my Switch out of a window. So and I'm like, I'm done. I'm not going to do this. I cannot even. But then I started over and I'm just hating myself. But who knows what's going to happen. I might just watch it on YouTube. I haven't decided yet. But my share of the week is my cute little Digivice. I got these for Brenda and Jen when you guys graduated. I think I got you guys a set. And then the lady sent me an extra one. Because so she was on Etsy. I don't remember her name, but support her if you can know who she is. But she messed up. She was making them by hand, and she messed up, and so it got delayed. So I didn't have it for the graduation right away. And she sent me a free one on top of it, so all 3 of us were able to have one because she was really cool. And she sent candies from Japan with it, which was really cool too. And I ate all of those. But that's my share of the week. I'm going to pass it on over to Brenda.
Hi everyone. My week has actually been pretty rough and really busy. A lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. Just trying to get through it. Yeah, it's been a tough week. My share of the week this week is my little Rebby. So she's from the new DuckTales. She's one of my favorite characters. I just really love how she's been reimagined in the new series. And so she actually comes as a set. So I'll share the rest on some other occasion. But yeah, I had to start with her first because she's my favorite.
So cute. Is she from did a certain company do her? Is it Funko? Is it?
Oh, it's just a Disney.
It's a Disney. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah. Very cute.
I think it's my turn. So my week has been okay. I feel, again, I think I've been saying this for 3 weeks straight with you guys, but what is time? I'm really upset that the weekend is already gone. So we usually record these on the weekend, but I'm really upset that the weekend's almost gone and I don't know where it's gone. So I feel that the week is both going by really quickly and really slowly at the same time.
Where did July go?
Right. I don't understand what happened with July.
They were here and they weren't.
I think I heard on the radio that it was 158 days to Christmas, and I'm like, that is so close. What is happening?
It's almost August. That's when the semester starts, and I'm like, I haven't done anything.
I have done no planning. It's gonna go great, guys. But yeah, and yeah. Anyways, I've been watching a lot of TV, just a lot of K-dramas. I recently just picked up Cursed, which just launched on Netflix. It's a reimagining of Nimwe's story, The Lady of the Lake, and it's going really well so far. I really enjoyed the cut splices of comic and live action in it. So yeah, I really enjoy this reimagining, and there's a Black Arthur and a Black Morgana, which is really exciting. But yeah, it's been a really interesting week on that end. In terms of my share of the week, so it's a 2-parter. So this is actually I collect these horse figurines. It's specifically Chinese horoscope or Asian horoscope horse figurines. This was a gift from Brenda for some sort of Christmas or birthday, and it's supposed to be a pencil holder. There's a little thing here, but instead of that, I ended up putting this letter opener, which is a sword.
Excalibur.
Yes, a replica of a sword that one of our other friends, Christine, got me when she went to France. So then I'm like, what am I going to do with this? And I was like, this is the perfect thing to do.
Beautiful.
So it's a two-parter, and I really it's one of my favorite things in my room. Anyways, sounds like we've had a very eventful week in terms of just where all of our feelings are coming from, both from just anxiety on that end to like confusion, and then also like frustration on time.
Most of it is very much work related, so
yeah,
that's a good place to be, I think.
Mine is very much not.
Mine is just life related. And so, I hope that all of you who are watching this vlog, like all of you are doing well and taking care of your own mental health. Make sure to take time for yourself and disconnect. I think it's really important to disconnect and reconnect with like things that are not electronic and not steady, things that we use to promote virtual interaction, because I think we're getting overwhelmed on that end, right? And remember, work-life balance, don't work all the time, set hours for yourselves, because, otherwise you're just going to keep working on end. So remember to be kind to yourself and do things that are important for your own sense of health and sanity. We decided this month that our theme would be History Reimagined. In part because we knew that Hamilton was going to launch off the month. It was going to drop on Disney, and we just thought, okay, what are we going to do with this piece? We really are trying to make sure that we have cohesive themes per month. And, in our conversations, History Reimagined really just struck us as something that we've always grown up with, especially with all the shows that we've, and media that we've consumed over our lifetimes. A lot of the best media that we've consumed has always had a center in history, and history that's been fictionalized and reimagined. On that end, our entry for this week is Anastasia, the musical, as Tori introduced us with. Tori and I grew up with Anastasia, and Brenda was exposed much later in life after many months or weeks of pestering on my end.
That's not true. Not for Anastasia. That was the different story, Jen. You can call me out on a lot of other things, but Anastasia's not one of them.
Okay. Anyways, so Anastasia is a reimagined tale of the Romanov history, basically. So the Romanovs were the last great royal family of Russia, and they met a very tragic end. And for their own tragic end has inspired a lot of myths, a lot of fictions. They're, between how they were killed to are they still alive to is this young girl, Anastasia, still alive somewhere. So the history itself is very interesting and very mysterious. And so I think it's been a great space for authors to sort of reimagine, to see where they could take the story. And Anastasia, the musical, presents the story of Anastasia, the young princess, having survived the assassination attempt on her family and reuniting with her grandmother, the Grand Duchess of Russia. So as always, I want to start off with, what are some, impressions or nostalgic points that you both remember from watching this?
Yeah, so I don't recall my first time seeing this. I don't think I saw it in the theater. Both of my parents are like huge movie collectors, like VHSs, DVDs out the wazoo growing up. My mom was really into like buying as many VHS Disney movies as she could back in the day. And while Anastasia is not, or at the time was not Disney, she's one of those things that my family like just assumed was Disney, I think, because like I didn't know she wasn't Disney until I was in like high school, because I used to always say she was my favorite Disney princess, because I swear I thought she was Disney for the longest time. But we just kind of had it, and it like very quickly became a family favorite of mine. Like I was super into it. My cousin Tony was really into it. My brother was into it. We used to sing the songs. Like we were like really into Anastasia. And then my younger sister Grace used to call her a station. So that's what we call her in our family. We're like, let's watch a station. Um, and, but yeah, but the movie's really nostalgic for me. Like, it just reminds me of like, so my grandparents own an apartment complex. It's like a 4-unit apartment complex. And growing up, they would pay my mom to go paint them, like when a tenant would move out. So my mom would go and paint them. And Anastasia reminds me of that, like just being stuck there for a whole weekend, having to help my mom paint, and then like having our like little tiny TV with like the VHS built inside of it, and that we would plug them into and watch just kind of movies on repeat as we were painting these walls. And my mom would be like, "Oh, if you guys help me, we'll go to Toys R Us and you can buy a toy or something." Was like kind of like to get us to work. But that was something we would have, like we'd have Anastasia on repeat, right, while we would be painting these apartments. And it just reminds me of that.
So my first memory of Anastasia was, and I didn't watch the movie back then, but my best friend in elementary school was really into the movie. And she would throw quotes at me all the time. And I hadn't seen it because my parents were not big on the theater. Like, I never went to the movie theater when I was a kid. I think my first time I might have been 11 or 12. But I was well into middle school by the first time I went to the movie theater. So, yeah, my friend would like throw movie quotes at me. You know how kids do. And I would be like, don't know it. I'm not familiar with it. But she would sing songs. And so when I first heard the soundtrack, I remember my friend singing those songs. But it wasn't necessarily something that I grew up with. I think the first time I watched it was either in high school or in college, and it was at Jen's prompting. We might have watched it together. I don't remember. But I think the first time it was you actually forced me to listen to the music, right? It was Once Upon a December because we were really into Christmas, and you played it. I don't know if it was a CD player. You guys remember those CD players? Or I might have been the first iPod we ever owned. I don't know, but I do remember like sitting in school listening to it. So yeah, I think we were in high school. But yeah, that was my first interaction with the film. The movie itself was, I enjoyed it. I didn't love it in the ways that Jenna and Tori love it, right? I do really like the movie. It's just not like, because I didn't grow up with it, it's not something that's necessarily near and dear to my heart like Mulan is, right? Mulan is one of those movies that I will probably be buried with a copy of the DVD because I love it so much. But yeah, I going back to it on this rewatch, I enjoyed it. I really, really just connect with the Bat in a weird way. Like, he is a mess and a half, and I feel like
and then I kick
I
him.
feel like him on just on a spiritual level, to quote you, Tori. I do feel like that Bat just understands what it's like to just be a fucking mess, and I really enjoyed it.
Bartok is so cute.
So cute. Didn't he get a spin-off movie?
He did, I think. Not a very good one.
Even a series or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's
He gets the like hat. He gets like a fancy hat. I remember, like a czar hat or something like that.
Yeah, it's
like
not
very. And I remember not liking it.
Yeah, I don't think it was very good. So I don't recall how I watched. I feel like it was playing on Channel 11 at 8 at night or something, and that's how I happened to catch Anastasia for the first time in my life, and I absolutely fell in love with it. So, I'm not, this is an interesting history because, like, I'm not necessarily the most musically inclined person. Like, I'm not someone that loves music intensely like Brenda does. But I grew up with a lot of like I ended up loving a lot of musicals growing up, right? Just Disney or just animated musicals. And, that's something I've passed on to Brenda, like just exposure to those things that I grew up with, right? Like Singing in the Rain is something I loved growing up. And, that was something I just happened to watch. And then I passed that on to her and she loved that completely.
Incidentally, another DVD that will be buried with me.
And then, then I liked Anastasia, and that's something, again, I forced Brenda to watch, right? And it's something I loved. I love the musicality of it, and I'm a sucker for all the Disney movies or all animated movies that involve animals. So I really loved Pucca. which is like the little stray dog that Anastasia ends up adopting. Yeah. And, you know, I love Bartok too, but I love Puka more. And I love silent animals too, the ones that are just like the facial expressions always get me. And so I really enjoyed that for that reason. And I really enjoyed the OTP. Like, I love Dimitri and Anastasia together as a couple. Like, I stand for them. And I enjoy, as I grew up, you know, I enjoy, like, Anastasia really did spark interest in looking into that Russian history for me. Like, I really was intrigued by this, you know, history had, and just the mystery surrounding their deaths, surrounding their upbringing, right? Because, like, you know, even as a family, like, their upbringing was very interesting to me. Like, their youngest son, who had taken over the throne, would, you know, suffered from a blood disorder, you know, and he was already a weak child, right? Like, how they died was so interesting to me. And, you know, it's incredibly violent and tragic, and I'm not promoting that whatsoever, but it was incredibly interesting, just like the fiction that came out of it, because there's so many rumors that were that came out of their deaths, whether they were alive or not, or how they died, and just that whole, you know, conspiracy of it all,
And the
right?
impersonators that were impersonating being Anastasia, they made like a living off of it. Like,
Well, it's one of those stories that kind of becomes its own myth, right? I think that happens a lot often with royal figures, right? Because it's already such a like novelty, right? Or such a thing that feels very whimsical and kind of fairy tale like, and then to have this tragedy happen, then it adds another element of mystery, and everybody wants to know, and there's so many cover-ups, but at the same time no one really knows the truth unless you were there, right? And so it's kind of become its own myth, right? In the way that I think a lot of history becomes kind of subsumed by the unknowingness of it all, right? And people trying to figure out what happened and put in their own 2 cents and add their own version of the history, right? And I think that's one of the things that Anastasia definitely does.
No, I completely agree, and I think that's a really great, you know, launching point in terms of like just how myth is created and how we interpret and contend with myth. We talked a little bit about this in our previous recording with Hamilton, right? The commodification of history and just that reimagining of history. You know, and in what ways does Anastasia follow that same trope? You know, I think you alluded a little bit to that, Brenda, with the idea of royalty, right? How do we see Anastasia following that and that legacy?
Well, I think you definitely see the, if I remember correctly, when the movie first came out, there was a huge media movement. And I don't know if this was intentional or it was following the movie's success, but because to have a movie that's not a Disney movie, but it's animated, do so well at the box office.
compete with Disney?
I remember that being a novelty by itself, right? And so there was so much interest in who are the Romanovs and what is happening. And so I remember seeing a lot more documentaries on PBS about the Romanovs. Yeah, I was a weird kid watching documentaries when I was a kid. I know. But anyway, but I do remember those. And I think in an ideal world, right, fiction like this creates interest, right, that the rest of us will then consume and then try to find out the truth, right? But I think what we see is also like a lot of the merchandise that came out for, because I think I remember it might have been Burger King or McDonald's that had toys. Okay, I'm seeing you two nod. Okay, I'm gonna let that go for
I'm
you
pretty
guys.
sure they had like full-on plushies of.
Oh yeah.
Like right? Like I feel like I know I had a bunch of plushies of him, and I'm pretty sure they all came from Burger King.
Yeah, Burger King was the king of toys growing up. Like, they actually gave out toys, I feel. And this is something we were talking about earlier in a side conversation. But I loved Anastasia so much that, you know, when Burger King launched their line for toys for Anastasia, like I was like, Mom, we need to go to Burger King and like get like that get that kids meal from there, because I need the toys, right? So I remember that I specifically had the Anastasia doll and the Puka doll as well. So like Puka was about this big, and like his ears flapped.
Yeah. I
And
like
then
vaguely
That was
remember
an
it.
actual toy from Burger King? Like,
Yeah.
not the little miniatures that McDonald's is giving out?
yes.
The hell was I doing at McDonald's?
And then Anastasia was actually a doll. So like she had two costumes, I think. She had her Anya costume, and then she had her Anastasia costume, and then like the hair retracted. So like you can make it short for the Anya look, and then you can make it long for the Anastasia look. I see your faces are still shocked.
I'm sorry, but what? Like, these are actual toys that, because, like, here's the thing, right? They'll give you, like, a cheap toy at McDonald's, right? But, like, Burger King actually had full-on Toys R Us quality, like, my parents would never buy for me kinds of toys that I could have gotten for free with a kid's meal.
Yes.
Stupid Burger King for not having a drive-through. Damn it. I'm mad. Sorry, the one in my neighborhood didn't have
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, like I know for sure Anastasia came from Burger King. I don't know about Puka. Puka I ended up getting at like a yard sale. So like growing up, I used to go to yards. My mother and I didn't have a car, but we were friends of our neighbors who had a car. And one of the things that the neighbors would do all the time would go to like yard sales or garage sales in like rich people's neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So I ended up picking up Puka there because like some kid didn't want it anymore. So I'm
Monster.
right, but I'm pretty sure like either it came from a toy store or it came from that Burger King line. But I know for sure Anastasia, the doll that I had, came from that Burger King line, and she was amazing.
I had two different versions of Bartok as like plushies, and they were quite big. They were like yay big with his like wingspan. And one of them was when his wings are out, and the other was when they were tucked in. And then I think there might have been a third one where he had the hat from that when they did the next movie. Like,
okay, yeah, probably.
But
that's why I said Burger King is a king, because like Burger King had like, some legit great toys. Like I remember the Pokeball like golden card that like you had a chance of getting Togepi, Jigglypuff, I think, right?
You could Pikachu if you were really lucky.
Yeah, so I had a couple of those. Still have those, by the way, but they were really big, and they came with your meal. And then
they were like metal.
Yeah, they were metal.
Heavy.
And also for the Rugrats movie, they gave away watches.
I remember that.
That makes me angry that I wasn't into Anastasia then, because like I remember the watches, I remember the Pokemon toys. So I must have gone to Burger King for sure, but I don't remember. But like I wasn't into Anastasia, so that's probably why I didn't want the doll. But
she was a great doll. Like I'm like the craftsmanship was amazing.
I wasn't huge on Barbie though when I was growing up, so I mean that might have been it too.
But like talking about that doll, like you guys missed out. You didn't have the Kimberly doll or the Anastasia.
I know. Your mom was like lit getting you all the great dolls, and like right? I was told play with boy toys. Here's a truck.
I would get the dollar. Okay, so you guys have gone to the 99-cent store. You've seen those dolls, right? Those were those were the dolls
I didn't like those dolls.
Me either. They were creepy.
They were. They're like kind of plasticky. Yeah, I didn't like those dolls.
They smelled too. It was awful. Yeah. I think I had one Barbie, and I got her for a birthday that I think it might have been my dad's boss who gave her to me, or it might have been my dad wanting to be like generous at one time. To be fair, they did what they could, right? But I remember not really ever having Barbies until I was a little older, right? And so I would do chores for my toys, but I feel like I missed out.
Well, like I think McDonald's had a lot of toys. I remember like a lot of fun. Like all my favorite toys came out of like Happy Meals or kids meals from Burger King and McDonald's, and I think that those are my fondest memories. But I think going back a little bit to the discussion of Anastasia, what do you guys think about just that, how the animators and creators dealt with that story? what liberties did they take with that story, and what are some good points and bad points about those liberties?
Yeah, so I have a few thoughts. One of the things that I found really interesting upon rewatching it as an adult is that the depiction of kind of communism being very evil, and how, like, it was the curse that created like those little green devil things, and they sowed the seeds of communism in the people, and then those people revolted, right? I thought was very interesting and quite political coming from like American creators, right? Like it was very much like it was like, I don't want to say anti-Russia, but like it was anti-communist party, but like also we like your story, but also like royalty is the most important thing, even though we don't have royalty.
You have to realize, I think and this is something that happened post Cold War, right? That a lot of media, American media, was very much in the business of casting Russia or anything pro-Russia as evil, right? I think about things, and Jen's gonna roll her eyes when I say this, but I think about things like Stargate, right? Like everything about Stargate was like, oh, the Russians, right? And it was one of those things. I mean, and in 2020, I feel like that's one of those things that we're all like, this again, right? And so it's one of those, when you see like this idea of communism as something completely bad, I do think that that is something that as Americans, we've almost been, I don't want to say trained because that has such a negative connotation, but I feel like that's actually been inherent in how we've been raised, right? And in the way that we kind of see things, right? And I think a lot of it is a consequence of the Cold War, right? And how insidious the US was in like trying to weed out communism around the world. If you want to know what I'm talking about, go watch Charlie Wilson's War. It will kind of summarize all of this stuff for you. But I do think that that's one of the things that happened there. I was interested with the depiction of Rasputin because even him,
Just
just
Lenin,
that
basically.
character, as a character, he's just another mythological figure, right? Like there's so many stories about this one person, and they're never positive, but they're always so ridiculous. And in some versions, it took like magic for him to die. In other versions, it was like, who the hell is this guy, right? Like I think that that was interesting for me in this story, in this reimagining. One of the things I did really like though was well, actually, let me, before I move on to that, just to point out the green stuff, right? Like, oh, the green is evil. I think that's one of the things that made it very much Disney-like, right? Like it was on Disney's brand, because
green fire, like
everything that, anytime that there's something evil in a Disney movie, it's green, right? So when you see that in Anastasia, as kids, we recognized it, right? And so I think a lot of us, or I can't speak for myself, but I'm guessing other children saw that and thought, oh yeah, Disney, right? Does that make sense?
It felt very Disney. Like it
was
felt
on brand with
the music. Like the music was quality, the animation was quality. Like it was like watching a Broadway number, right?
Absolutely. I think the quality of the music alone would lend itself to like, oh, really? This isn't Disney? But yeah, and then the other element is the family stuff, right? Like that family, everyone gets a happy ending. But even in the happy ending, I felt like the Anastasia ending was a little bit more nuanced than a typical Disney movie. So it's not a dead giveaway, but it is one of those things that helps us identify the differences, right? Because in a Disney movie, she would have gotten like the coronation party, right? And she would have gotten the procession, and she would have gone back and become royalty or whatever, which again is one of those really
and Dimitri would have been elevated in status. And
right, yeah, and Americans have a very weird relationship when it comes to monarchy, right? Like the entire idea, we're fascinated by it, but we don't want it, right? It's very, very odd. But yeah, she would have had that really big coronation, and it would have ended in a wedding and whatever, right? And no, she just kind of bows out and pieces out. It's like, no, I'm gonna live my life.
And I really liked what like kind of the message was behind that ending, right? Because Anastasia is about to be formally reintroduced to France as, you know, a Romanov, the survivor, the heir to the throne, etc. And she's talking to her grandma, and she's like, I don't, and her grandma says, you were born into this life, but you don't have to stay in it, right? Like, you were born into the glitz and the glam and the jewels and the parties, but you don't have to stay in it if you don't want to. And she's like, all I wanted was you, and now I'm gonna go follow my heart. And I really liked that. Like,
That
you know,
sense of
she had agency.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, the sense of choice and agency, right?
yeah.
I think that is so ahead of its time. And I don't say that necessarily because like the 90s were pretty, I don't know, they're an interesting time, right? On one hand,
Yeah.
we've had a lot of movement toward women's rights, but in a lot of senses, we also had a lot of not that, right? I'm sorry.
Right.
I'm out of words. It's Sunday and I'm out of words. But with Anya, she makes that choice not to be the princess, right? And every single Disney movie, it's like, oh, let's elevate the princess, let's be the princess, right? And in this, she's like, no, I'm good.
She's like, nah, my frock is comfortable, my little bun thing is comfortable.
Yeah. And so to choose something beyond the monarchy or something that's not that, I think that was a really powerful statement. That I don't think any Disney movie before it had really done.
Right.
Yeah,
Because even when Ariel leaves, she just goes into like land royalty. Like,
Right. She moved. Yeah. Sorry.
yeah, I think that that's one of the reasons why I gravitated to Anastasia in the first place. I'm like really loving this conversation for that, topic of female agency. All the women characters that I grew up with that I ended up loving were powerful women, right? That were independent and that could do things on their own and do amazing things on their own, right? And so like I'm thinking about Xena, right? I'm thinking about Kimberly in a small way, right? I'm thinking about Sydney Fox, Relic Hunter. Go watch that recording, right? Just all
on
these.
Amazon Prime.
It's on Amazon Prime, yeah, and it's Anastasia falls in line with all of that, right? She's so spunky as Anya, right? She's so like, she has a mind of her own. She just, she's unsure of herself because she has amnesia, but that's not stopping her from going out and doing things on her own and like having an opinion, right? Fighting back against Dimitri on a constant basis, saying like, you're wrong. This,
Right.
You're not considering this, or you're kind of being a jerk, right? Was, I think, really formative for me at growing up, right?
And she has, and there's two spots specifically that like really stood out to me as a child. One was where she's arguing with Dimitri after she's been reunited with her grandma. And this like some random butler guy is like, you will address her as her highness. And she's like, it's fine. Like, she's like, be quiet. Like, we're arguing. Don't interrupt. Like, she doesn't care, like, about the titles and stuff. And Dimitri, of course, bows and, like, does all the things. But the scene where she overhears, because the door's left cracked open, that Dimitri was in it for money, not trying to do something nice. He was trying to trick this old lady to get money. And she is so mad at him. She was like, she doesn't even want to meet her, right? She is like, she's like, you are, like, you make me so angry and sick. Like, she's so mad at him. And then, like, Dimitri has to, like, sneak grandmama into her, like, room. And she's like, go away, Dimitri! And then she's like, I'm not Dimitri! And then...
Yeah, I think, like, I think back to, like, the music. The music was phenomenal, right? Like, just, there's fantastic numbers. Like, there's a rumor in St. Petersburg.
That's one of my favorites.
Same.
In the dark of the night, evil will find you. That's another one I liked a lot too.
Yeah, that one's great.
Of course, Once Upon a December is like the Let It Go of the movie.
And I love that song growing
Me too.
up. But and I want to talk a little bit about Once Upon a December, just not because I just love it, but I think that it's a really great example of how the film sort of contends with the myth and history of things in a very nostalgic way. Right, like Once Upon a December, is a way to it's the audience's way to go into Anastasia's memory in both like the memory that is absent to her and the memory that she's trying to reach, right? And kind of give you some context of like what that you know, what her past life was like, right? And so I think that's like the way that it does like the movement in and out with the nostalgia and the memory. I think that that's a visual example of just what the story itself is doing, right? It's at ends in contention with like the history of Anastasia Romanoff and then the myth of Anastasia Romanoff, right? And how it's threading that line. And you know, one of the things that, you know, while I love the movie, I think it also kind of presents a very like vanilla version of things of that history, right? Like it gives Anastasia that happy ending, but it you know, and you know, presents Rasputin as that, I think he's always going to be that really, you know, mythical, larger than life, weird individual, right? Across all mediums, but it does kind of ignore the violent, tragic ending, right? Like when the rioters break into the palace and they're escaping, right? Like that did happen, and that is a traumatic point of history, right? Yeah. Like the movie says, oh, she escapes, but you know, in reality, the family was taken, and they were put into this like secluded, you know, cabin in the woods, sort of, and then they were executed. Yeah, terribly executed.
Violently.
Yeah.
Well, just a weird little tidbit. We're actually recording this on July 19th. The Romanov family was assassinated July 17th. So this past week or so. Yeah, 2 days ago would have been the anniversary of their assassination.
That is very coincidental and very interesting.
The ghost wanted to be heard.
This is weird, guys.
I do think too, though, I liked that Fox didn't shy away from the rest of the Romanov family dying in the Anastasia film. Like, at least they stayed true to that. I'm going to get into detail because, again, it's a children's movie. But I do like that they were like, yep, sole survivor, outside of her grandma. Which I enjoyed that they at least tried to stay true to, right? Because they could have been like, everybody lived. Right, like Tangled or something, right, where it's like, oh, here's everybody, we're all a happy family again.
Yeah, I like Tangled. Leave Tangled alone.
I like Tangled too, don't get me wrong, but like, you know, but like I like that they kind of like set the stakes. They stayed true in that sense, right? Like
I think that's how like the film is able to play both sides, right, in terms of being a children's film and a film that can be enjoyable by young adults, right? Because Anastasia does play with the nuances a lot more than, you know, earlier Disney princess films, right? It does say like the family dies. We don't get the violent history of that, but we do get that versus
that she's
like,
a sole survivor,
right? Versus like other Disney films where, you know, like I'm thinking Pocahontas.
Right.
And like the vanilla version of colonization that happened there.
Right.
With that movie, you guys, I can't.
And Anastasia plays into that kind of mythos again of like just how sensationalized the thought that Anastasia might be alive still trickled through Russia. Like there were just people were impersonating her, being like, "Oh, I'm actually her. I survived," and like, you know, it was just this like. Just it's giant.
And I'm out of curiosity, do either of you know why it was the Anastasia figure that became such a myth?
I don't know. I want to say I vaguely remember hearing or reading that she was the favorite, but which means she theoretically would have been in the public eye a little more, is my guess. And I feel like I've heard that, but I don't want to put anything into the like energy out there that's incorrect. So
right. I want to say my mind is a bit rusty on this, but I also remember reading somewhere that she was also like the youngest, and she was one of the ones that was that died the lot, like she died last almost, right?
Because she was in a separate place, because like a majority of the family was killed in one location, and then she and her the younger brother, I think the brother right below her or something, were at a second place and killed separately.
All right.
I
So
don't
this is
Or
one of the
dumped
things that
separately or something like that.
I don't remember that, but I do remember that, like, so when the family was moved, they took all of their royal jewels, and what the mom had done was that they sewed those jewels into the bodices and the clothes of the children.
Mm.
And so when they were executed, the part of the myth was, and the sensationalization, the myth there was that when they tried to execute them, the bullets would fly off the bodices,
Yeah.
because they were jewel encrusted, and so like that spooked the soldiers even more, right? And so like it took a very long time for that execution to happen. And I think part of what part of what I remember reading back when was that like Anastasia was one of the last.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know that she and her brother are buried in a separate, or found in a separate location when they found the remains.
All right, so this is one of the things that I'll have to read and look into, because it is fascinating, right? And I think that's exactly what a good piece of historical fiction does, right? Is inspire that sense of, hey, I want to know more.
Go research.
I will
right?
have to go research that on my own. Thank
It's
you.
horrifying, and it is really upsetting. I am kind of obsessed with the Romanov family. I'm not gonna lie. Like it's so tragic. It's one of those things where it's like so tragic, and you like, as a Pisces, fantasize about like, what would you do if you were there? How would you try to stop this? Like, right? And things like that, because it's so sad, and like, and then you love the character so much on your movie, show, musical, right?
Well, and to me, it's very interesting how the Romanovs are treated, right? Because it's one of those things where, the entire family was murdered, as a result of like this communist wave, right? And this, you have to realize that Russia was going through their own kind of political and economic situation, right? That this led up to that, right? And I think about I compare it a lot to the Marie Antoinette story, right? Because you have a similar revolution happening there, right? And it's a lot. I mean, that's the thing you have to realize about revolutions, right? They're bloody, and people die, and it's awful, but that's the reality of how our history has been, right? It's been a bloody history. So it's interesting to me how the Romanovs have been kind of mythologized in a way that like other royals haven't necessarily.
And yeah, to speak to that mythos as well, right? They also, through Russian Orthodox Church, which is a sect of Catholicism, have been sainted. Like they're legit saints. So like that's another even layer to it, right? Like they're considered saints now. Anastasia is for sure. I'm not sure about the rest of them.
Wow, I did not know that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I believe her father and mother are also sainted, but I mean, Doug definitely fact checked me.
I will.
I'm almost positive. I remember learning that in like Catholic. I went to Catholic school, and I feel like I remember them being on a saint test. So.
Yeah, I think that's part of like the allure of the Romanovs, right? Is that like they're part of this section of history that happened right before that overthrowing of modern, launching Russia into modern Russia, right?
And there's so much guilt, and I think that's part of why they're sainted and why they had these like, they were reburied all fancily, like to try to, I think, make up for like the atrocity, right?
So all were canonized as victims of the oppression by the Bolsheviks.
Okay.
On August 2000.
Oh. Yeah. So I think that like with Anastasia's story, you're right, Tori. I think there is an immense amount of guilt that is associated with it, right? There's also like an immense amount of like uncertainty. There's so many details that are who's like based off like rumor, right? And based on
there were so many cover-ups.
There were so many cover-ups. There were
deletions.
Right. There's so much uncertainty around it that like allowed for the mystery to keep going and that fantasy to keep going, right? And I think
the government was even saying they were alive at one point still after being murdered. Like they're like, oh, they're all totally fine. What you're talking about? They're in Siberia.
Like, right. And I think that any like historical fiction that we encounter reimagining, always trying to contend with that piece of what if, right? And trying to contend with that piece of what if this tragedy didn't have to have a like tragic ending, or what if there wasn't a tragic ending, right? What if, how do we work with those feelings of guilt? How do we work with those feelings of uncertainty? And I think
And justice.
and injustice, right? And
so Anya's able to get justice for her family in Anastasia, though animated through the American lens and all that, but she gets to stomp on that vial and say, Das Vidanya, and like, just end him, right?
yeah, and you know, that's, you're right, like it's a way to get back that, you know, correct injustice, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the animated sense. And I think the film does that. Like, the film provides a space for Anastasia to live in this kind of fantasy world, right? And where she gets a happy ending, and
Mm-hmm.
one that's seeded by her own agency and sense of free will.
I'm just going to point out, I feel like what you just said.
Which is important to see.
I think there was a delay.
Yes. What did you say again, Brenda? Can you repeat that?
I was just going to comment on the fact that what you just said about the mythology as a way of contending with historic guilt and trauma. I think there's a paper in there for you. I'm just going to put that out there. Because I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That seems like work, though. And what is work? Quarantine.
I mean, conferences are canceled for the next year.
I can barely be motivated to like wash my hair and shave like on a weekly basis.
I've been grading for a week, and I have more grading coming into me tonight at midnight, and I'm just so done.
If we weren't doing this, I guarantee you I would have not shaved or showered or done my hair all summer. Like, I was like, I can't look a mess on camera.
I have to record a video lecture after this, so I'm in the same boat.
And I think, you know, I think that's why we opened today with, like, it's important to check back into yourself, right? Check back with yourself and, you know, provide yourself with the nourishment that you need in terms of, like, is that a hobby? Is that time away from your computer? Is that just
sleep for me right now? But
right, is that just plain sleep? And for some of us, it's like escapism that, you know, Anastasia provides.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about like that mystery surrounding Anastasia, you know, and just the reimagining of Anastasia's history to alleviate guilt, right? But how do we, you know, how do we feel about Anastasia's now inclusion into that, you know, Disney pantheon, right? Because if you don't know, Disney did a massive purchase right before the pandemic, and they purchased out Fox, which for many was great, for many not so great. But one of the rights that they gained was Anastasia, and she's technically a princess. So how do we feel about her inclusion or not inclusion into that pantheon of princesses?
I'm into it, mainly because I know Disney's really into remaking everything live action, and I would really love a live action Anastasia.
There is live action
production.
What was that?
Production.
A stage production.
Yeah. I would really love to see our good old Anya like once again on the screen, and you know, because a lot of the remakes, I haven't seen all of them, so I'm not going to claim to be an expert, but they seem to be wanting to deal with the criticisms Disney has received as a company, has been a big kind of like push. So it might be interesting to see what they do with like this retelling of the Romanov family in a kind of newly critiqued Disney world. But I like it. I think the music's great. I think that, I mean, I'm against, like, I'm not a big Disney fan in general. Like, I think the mouse owns too much and needs to be taken down. But I I mean, if they got her, might as well use her. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I would hate for Disney to do to a lot of their Fox purchases what they've done to their own stuff, where they have all this stuff and they just don't let us have it. And like, I don't like when they put things in the vault. Like, I'm like, free the content. Um,
Oh my
like,
goodness, I hate that vault.
yeah,
Oh,
right? Like, it's
so
like they disappear movies into there and you'll never see them again.
when Lion King went into the vault, I remember being so angry because like it was one of my favorite movies and I didn't have it on VHS, right? Because just couldn't afford it. So I would watch it on TV when it would come on, but and then like when we would find, my parents would finally say, okay, we're gonna buy it for you. I'm like, but it's in the vault. I hated that. Oh my god, I hate that vault. Anyway, sorry. So
yeah, I just wish, especially with Disney Plus, you'd think everything's digital. Why can't we just access the freaking digital vault? Like,
is the vault still a thing?
I think so, because they don't have everything on Disney Plus yet, which also makes me go, but you own it all. Why isn't it there? Especially if I'm paying a monthly service or a fee. But
I think the majority is on Disney Plus, but there's some things that are not because they're not necessarily remastered or something.
I'm just happy that that A Princess Bride is on there, so happy. Okay, so
yeah, like
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I think that I love the idea of Anastasia being part of that Disney princess line, but I also, I'm a bit hesitant. I don't want her to be further commodified, right? In terms of like, she's someone we should like look up to, and let's ignore the entire history behind Anastasia, if that makes sense, right? I feel that way because she is a historical figure, right?
That's exactly what you would need to actually go back to the definition of a Disney princess, right? Because every single Disney princess that they have had, with the exception of Mulan maybe and Pocahontas, are not necessarily rooted in reality, right? They're not real historical figures. And then so it like it goes back to that definition, right? How are you going to define a Disney princess? Is it going to be someone who's just in a fantasy space, which would inevitably mean that then Pocahontas isn't part of that, which seems unfair. But then you look at the more strict definition, are they royalty? Well, then Mulan is not a princess, right? Because she's never a princess. But I don't know, with Anastasia, it's one of those things that I feel the same way with like The Simpsons, right? Like, I don't like that Disney has The Simpsons. I don't like that it's censored. I don't like that a lot of the jokes are gone, right? And yet some of the jokes about The Simpsons making fun of Disney specifically and how they're a huge corporation, they're still there, but they're not as like it's funny, but funny in a sad way, right? So I feel the same way you do, Jen, with that. I don't know. I go back and forth because it's the same thing with Buffy, right? Do we want Buffy to be a Disney princess?
oh God, I can only imagine what they do to her. She'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm Buffy and I don't like to fight, so I really need Angel and Spike to save me all the time. Good thing Xander's the Slayer. Like, right? Like,
I think,
I can't believe you just said those words.
like that's
Don't
what I feel
watch
like
your
Disney
mouth
Buffy
out.
would be. She'd be like, I'm the heart of the team because I'm a woman and that's my role. Like,
well, and I think that's why it's important to consider, like Brenda's point, right? Like, we need to re-examine our definition of Disney princess, right? Because technically, Widow, Mantis, Scarlet Witch, all technically owned by Disney, but not necessarily considered princesses because they're under the Marvel banner, right? And so I think that like Buffy in itself would probably be under its own banner and be its own verse, right? But yeah, I think for me, like, Pocahontas, I did like Pocahontas growing up in terms of like she was someone that looked like me-ish, right? And I remember having some things, and I also remember not loving, like having a really interesting relationship of not liking the movie, but liking that there was this like brown person that kind of looked like me.
I also didn't like, but liked it too. Like,
yeah.
Well,
and
the way that colonialism is depicted in that movie is, I think that's what we were responding to as children, right? because I had the same experience you guys did. I also
I
had my
liked
own
the
story with
music.
Pocahontas, but the music was beautiful.
I liked the colors.
I loved her. Like, I loved her
Yeah.
personality. I loved who she was. But the story, like, all the supporting characters is like,
Even like her one friend with the short hair, I was like, girl, you shady.
Yeah, even like you're right. Like I did love Pocahontas for her, bravery and her sense of
When
independence.
she jumps off the waterfall.
she is the best part of the movie.
Right. And yet also like Anastasia, Pocahontas is based on a real person, right? And but also they took a lot of liberties with her history. And I think that's something that's why I'm a little bit hesitant, including these individuals in that pantheon, because while I'm fine with like the other princesses that are fictionalized, they're based on fairy tales, but they're fictionalized, right? There's something to be said about including historical figures and not recognizing, I think, their struggles, right, and their real lived realities, right? And it's, I'm great that like we have inclusion of like Pocahontas in there, but also like let's not forget like her lived reality and her struggles and the conflicts that she encountered as Indigenous woman, right? Same thing with Anastasia. Let's not forget that she suffered a very violent death.
She was a child. Let's not forget the fact that she was a child, right?
And she didn't get to grow up and meet up Dimitri, right? That's complete fantasy. Let's not forget that, and that like people are capable of terrible things.
Yeah, and I remember reading like their bodies were like mutilated, like beyond recognition. They poured acid on their dead bodies, like all kinds of just awful, horrible things.
Right.
Maybe I won't go read then. Will not be something I need in my life right now.
Yeah, it was very like, because like the government said they were put before a firing squad, but that's like not true. They were like brutally murdered.
I mean,
Yeah,
firing squad is still pretty brutal, I think.
And that's what like I think part of like going back to an earlier point is that we have such an interesting relationship with royalty and how royalty is portrayed on screen, right? I think part of what Brenda was alluding to earlier is that royalty monarchs live a very interesting different reality to us, right? They follow a lot of protocols and procedure. They come with their own wealth of history, family, and country history that they need to then abide by and also respect, and also then continue to perpetuate, because that's how they perpetuate their own sense of grandeur, right? And part of the allure there is like part of that celebrity allure, right? Is that who are these individuals that are living larger than life and living lived realities that seem very disconnected from what makes life actually function, right? And that's part of like Anastasia's allure too, is I think part of it is she got to live like us for a very long period of time and then found out she's royalty by remembering that she's royalty, right?
Yeah.
And then chose to continue to live like us.
Right. And I think that's part of like the fun fantasy space of Anastasia. And we talked about access a lot, in our previous Hamilton recording. And I think Anastasia, this film, provides a wonderful access point to researching history.
I might be wrong on the timeline, but I'm almost positive that at the time, what sparked the whole movie to even come out was they found the Romanov tomb, which had 2 missing bodies. 2 of the children were missing, which just like sparked this like, what if? Like she must have like got it out and then went into hiding, because that's what you do, right? They found the 2 bodies later, but like in short, like 2000-ish, I want to say. They've done a few DNA tests and stuff like that as well, and they've been positive every single time. But Russia's really weird about it, like because they've been outsourced people came in and did it, and I know that the Russian church is like, we don't like you doing this. I forget why they got mad, but they were not into it. But they did all kinds of forensic stuff on it. They ended up having like I want to say they like found like Lennon and company guilty, but like nothing was done because they're already long dead. But like I think they officially came out and said like this was a murder and they were wrong, and if they were alive they would be punished.
Yeah, I think I remember reading parts of that too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that like Anastasia provides a wonderful entry point for those who want to go into Russian history. I know that that's what like this film for me like sparked an interest in Russian history, like royal history specifically, right? I was very like I remember wanting to go into my first class in college at SMC and wanting to take a class on like European Russian history, right? Because I was so in love with this version that Anastasia presented me, right? And that's why I think it's a great film for that reason, right? As an entry point, as an entertainment point. But to forget the reality and the history that kind of sparked that creation, I think would be a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
If any, like Hamilton, like, yeah, great music, great play. Also, like, go back and read the Federalist Papers, go back and read about go back to read about the Founding Fathers and then make your own judgments about that, right? Are there, like, specific songs that we can't get over?
There's a rumor in St. Petersburg is probably...
That's one of my favorites, too.
If I had started with that song, I probably would have consumed the movie the way that I consumed Hamilton, I think. Just because it's such a big number, right? And there's so many voices, and I love choruses. Like, I love this idea of the harmony that is created by this, like, a bunch of different voices, right? And it's just one of those things that it's just such a bouncy tune too.
And it's sassy. Like the words are sassy. Like
it's one of those things that I think about now, right? With in terms of like misinformation and the way that that's propagated, right? And how we seem to think that this is a new thing, right? Like it's not. It's been around for a while, right? And this idea of like how a rumor first gets started, and then like how it starts with this little whisper, and then it just jumps into this big, incredible number. I think that is really fascinating. But I like the way that they play it up in the
and
film.
Very meta with the myth of Anastasia herself. Like that was the rumor of St. Petersburg, right? That she's out there alive, right?
Yeah, and I love the incredible like choreography that's displayed in St. Petersburg. Like I love musical numbers where you have like big dance numbers, right?
Yeah.
And I love like how that was choreographed on the storyboard. And I also loved how that was also an introduction to the state of Russia and the classism that was, that perpetrated the mutiny, right? Because you see a bunch of folks just like not having enough to eat or struggling to make ends meet. Like it's provided in this very catchy tune, but you see that visually. Like all of these are individuals
and the factory, like the rice.
Well,
factory.
and one of the things that we actually didn't talk about, and the way that the classism is portrayed in this movie, right? I think that's one of the things that really makes Anastasia that kind of character that we kind of root for, right? Mm-hmm. She's literally drawing on the fair and known myth from like medieval literature, right? Where it's this idea that you're actually part of the aristocracy or the nobility class, but something has happened to remove you from that, so you're the unknown part of that aristocracy. But then at some point some kind of restoration happens, and so I think that that's actually one of the things that we see a lot of in movies. It's a trope, right? We definitely see it in telenovelas a lot. I know that was probably the one trope that I remember consistently across every telenovela I watched when I was a kid, unless it was Luz Clarita, and even that had an element of that. But I know. Yeah, okay, anyway, so we're such 90s kids, Jen. But yeah, I think with this movie in particular, well, not in particular, just this movie, the way that we see Anastasia kind of have to, or Anya kind of has to struggle with her class, right? And she has to relearn how to be a princess or how to be part of the aristocracy, because otherwise the grandmother won't understand her or won't believe her, right? And for her, it's a pursuit of family. It's not necessarily a pursuit of riches and
Yeah.
all of this stuff, right? It's like, I want to know my family, right? Whereas you see with Dimitri, it's like, oh, I've been poor my entire life. Like, I need money. I need you to be I need you to be Anastasia.
And there's that really great scene at the very, very beginning where they're dancing, and Anastasia's dancing with her dad, and she's like, "Whoa," at her grandma as they're dancing. And then Dimitri like sneaks kind of by, and you think, oh, they're the same age, they must be friends. And Dimitri's told, you are a servant, go back to the kitchen, that's where you belong. Like, you're not allowed to even look at the party.
Right.
And that just adds to that classism, right?
Right. And that's part of, like, you know, part of what I like about the movie is that it presents full characters, right? It's not my favorite number by far, but I do like the Paris number because you get some insight on like Dimitri's feelings at that moment, right? And knowing that like he and Anastasia are coming from two different class backgrounds and that their love is impossible if she decides, you know, if she decides to reclaim her birthright, right? Like, and knowing that like he needs to let her go for that reason, right? And so I thought like that was like, you don't get a lot of Prince type, you know, male counterpart characters in Disney movies being fully explored, but I thought that they presented Dimitri as very complex for an animated film, right?
Yeah.
Here's this kid that is trying to make ends meet, right? And ends up finding someone that he finds, and then realizing that the same things that motivate him to be this kind of swindler are the same things that are going to keep them apart.
Absolutely. I think the first time we got a Disney, not Prince, but Disney character who was a little bit more understanding might have been Kristoff. And I hate saying that because I'm not a Frozen fan, but I do love that line where he's like, my love's not fragile. I do love that line. But anyway.
Yeah, I don't think we really started to see like this understanding fully developed, like putting the female protagonist needs, like what they want, and helping them achieve that until around like Tangled Frozen. Like,
you're right. We do see that in Tangled a little bit with
not as
Lynn.
Yeah, it's like that's where I feel like they start taking the steps, and Dimitri is like willing to walk away. He doesn't even take the reward money. Like, he's like, no, like, I'm sorry, like, this is what you want and need and is rightfully yours, and I need to make sure you get it. Like,
and there's also like a sense of patriotism, right? That like in that decision making, right? Like he knows that this is what's right for Russia in the monarchy sense, for her to go back and reclaim that birthright and, you know, and step away from that, right? I think that's what motivates his decision making too, right? Because otherwise, you know, it's implicit. It's not necessarily said outright, but it's part of the reason why he helps them escape in the first place, right? He's that kid that like opens a wall and gets them out, right? Like, has a sense of loyalty.
Right,
So,
like to protect the monarchs, like.
And that's kind of what that's what I enjoy, is that you get these full like characters, like even the Grand Duchess and the small parts that she's afforded, you know, with Angela Lansbury, you know, wonderful voice there, you know, saying like she's this grandmother that dotes on Anastasia, and then telling Anastasia, you were born into this, as Tori said, right? But you get to decide whether you want this or not, right? Because she sees that there is a loophole now for Anastasia to escape, right?
She's like, you'll always be my granddaughter. Like, I will always love you. I will always be your family. Like,
I will always provide for you. But we can keep the myth going that you're dead, right? And maybe this is for the best, right? And so I really enjoyed that for that reason. And, you know, what I really enjoyed going back to watch it was seeing the artistry that was put into the storyboarding and the animation. Like, it's a beautiful animation.
The facial expressions are like so well done.
And it's so, I mean, obviously we don't get that anymore. Like, you know, now the trend is seeing like photorealism, right? That's the trend for like Disney movies and Pixar and stuff. And it reminded me like, no, like this is really great animation, right? That we don't get to see very often anymore.
Like when they're on the boat and it's raining and the wave, I'm like, I was just like, oh my God, I miss this. Like,
yeah,
the
and
style of animation rather.
right. And what I enjoy too is that like Dimitri and Anya and all of them were drawn as adults, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like there isn't this like infantilization or like kind of their visual look.
Right. Like they've got like the wrinkle lines and like, not wrinkle, but like, you know, like they have like, yeah, they're not baby faced, right? Like.
Right. And that I'm like, that's a really small thing, but like, you know, that's something that you don't see quite often in other animated films. Like sometimes you just get like a very minimalist, you know, very
rounded face, like
eyes are bigger than most of the other features. Yeah, you don't actually get the adult look.
Yeah.
What you do in Anastasia.
And that's kind of like one of the small things, right? That like the film does, you know, and it had a really great cast too. Like you had John Cusack, you had Meg Ryan, you had Kelsey Grammer and Angela Lansbury as part of that main cast.
Yeah, and I think too that there's one of the things I really enjoyed are these little like, before they figure out she's actually Anastasia, there's all these like little nuggets, right, where they're like, wait, but is she though? Like because the myth is still there, right, that she's alive somewhere, and it's like right, they're singing, they're on their way to Sophie's house, and which is like her great aunt or something like that, or her cousin, I don't know, and they're like, oh, this is your Uncle Bloody 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 Blue, and he did this stuff, and she's like, I recall his yellow cat, and they're like, I don't think we said that to her. like, that's not in the list, but like, you know, things like that happen, right?
Can we talk a little bit about Sophie and just how great it was? Like
Sophie.
A full-bodied woman on this animated film who isn't matronly, but is like the life of the party.
And like all the sex appeal, she's like the desired one, like.
And you know, and she does kind of play into the ditzy role a little bit, but that's so like unique. That's so uncommon as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I really enjoyed seeing someone like that on the screen.
Me too. And she's like ditzy, but in a good way. Like it's like her ditziness, I feel oftentimes is an act, like, because she sees something and she's like, oh, well, no one's gonna take me seriously, so I have to be like, oh, oopsie, we just happen to be at the ballet. Like, you know, like.
Part of her, I don't want to say weapons, right, but it's part of her
charm.
She navigates high society, right?
Yeah, because she's not a grand duchess.
Very savvy. Right, and I think that's one of the things that I really enjoyed about Sophie, because she is very attuned to how to navigate this space and how to use whatever she has on hand to work, right, to make it work for herself. But I also think she's just kind, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's an element,
and she wants it to be real for her cousin, like
kindness for her. Yeah, like she will vet as many people as it takes, but she doesn't want her cousin to have to go through yet another heartbreak. And I think is what mostly resonates with me with her.
Yeah, and she straight up asks Anya point blank, how'd you get out of the palace then? She's like, if you her, how'd you get out? And everyone's all like, and then she's like, the wall opened? That sounds weird, but I feel like a wall opened. And then like, Sophie's like, whatever, crazy. And then Dimitri's like, oh shit.
He's, oh my God, you're that person.
He's like, oh my God, you're her. Like, for real, not for play.
But yeah, with Sophie, like, I think that ditziness is traditionally associated. It's a trope. It's traditionally associated with a younger sister. That's, younger and just like kind of a supporting character. And so it's really nice to kind of see her in that role, and again, play that up to navigate, high society, as you guys both have mentioned. And, it's good to see someone like Vlad too, right? Someone who was afforded a place in high society and then has to resort to these sort of schemes now to survive.
Like cabinet or something, he said, right? Or
Yeah.
court, or like he was like well-to-do before
Hmm.
the fall of the Romanovs.
Right. And so you see someone like him having to re-navigate how to live in this society now that he doesn't have his old station or
And
those
he's
stations.
trying to get back to that station by being the savior, by bringing Anastasia to the Grand Duchess and hoping he gets like reinstated somewhere.
Right. So like you see a lot of, you see like Anya, Dmitri, and Vlad sort of contend with like this post-Romanov Russia. And the only one that is not doing that successfully is Rasputin, because he's literally like a corpse.
Yeah.
Right. A reanimated corpse in a way. But like In the Dark of the Night is a really great one as well. Right. I love that. But like I think it does,
and it's so happy though, despite being so dark. Like he's
yeah,
thinking about murdering her in the middle of the night. But it's like to this like really upbeat tune.
right. And you know what I love about that piece too is it's like I think it plays really well into and maybe Tori can expand on this, the mysticism associated with the church or with religion, right? Because like he's coming from this like very like almost like religious like kind of look and
Yeah.
maybe motivation.
He looks like a monk. He really does.
Yeah.
Like he totally looks like a monk, and like he like one of the things he does that really like triggers the Catholicness with me is like he attacks Anya in her dreams, right? Like he gets into her dreams, and like that is something that's very like Catholic, like Joan of Arc, like dreamed like God was talking to her, right? Like all these, they happen like dreams to these people, right? Like it's like, oh, I dream, like God spoke to me in my dream, right? Or a dream-like state.
Medieval trope, yeah.
Yeah, and so it was really cool to kind of see him kind of do this like dark stuff.
Yeah, and I think that like, you know, the reason I think I said like you can expand on that is because you did go to that, you know, you did have a Catholic school upbringing, but I feel like sometimes the church is also portrayed in both a mysterious, sinister kind of like, idolatry.
Yeah, there's even Catholic myths that like the Pope in the Vatican has like a secret hidden room dedicated to like something. Like I mean, even with like Warrior Nun, we saw that, right? Like the church is hiding secrets from the general public about actual, honest to God, like afterlife, because they need to air quote, control the masses, right? That's definitely like my whole life. That's something that's been talked about in Catholicism, going to Catholic school, that, you know, people are hiding things from us.
Right. And I think that In the Dark of the Night does like such a good job of like just jumping onto that boat of like, yeah, this is sort of like,
reminded me a lot too of the room where it happens in Hamilton, in terms of like this like kind of behind closed doors thing, that it's not for the general public, right? The assassination thing was personal, not political, like you know, like
connection. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. But yeah, I think it plays into that, right? And then I love Journey to the Past. Like I think that's a great Frozen moment.
I'm not remembering that one. What song is that?
Is I don't dun 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 dun.
Dun, 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 dun. Okay. I like
So
that one a lot too.
it's her like, I'm leaving.
Don't fail me now.
Yes. It's her leaving the orphanage and reclaiming her sense.
That one's so fucking good.
We're going into the sea in Moana.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that's such a good song. God, that movie has such good music. I forgot, like, because when I went to rewatch it, I was like, I didn't remember a lot of the songs, and I was like, is it just Once Upon a December? Is that the only song that in St. Petersburg? Then I watched it, I was like, oh no, there's a lot. Wait, how did I forget about these? Because like my brother, my cousin, and I used to reenact it. Like we'd put it on and we like reenact as we watch. Like, so there's this stupid scene. We still do this sometimes to us, where the lady, she has like the really long cigarette. She has like the fur coat on, and she's like really skinny, and she's like kind of gross looking, and she's like, grandma. She like throws her coat up. She's like, it's I, Anastasia. We used to like do that like all the time to each other. Like we'd like have a jacket on and be like, grandma. Like, because it was just so ridiculous. Like
I want you to do that from now on to us.
Like when we are able to be in, when we have our first faculty meeting and we can actually be in one room together, I need you to come in like that.
like throw my words up and be like, grandma, it's I, Anastasia. And she's like, have a cigarette, and like she looks nothing like her. She's like blonde, I think. Like
She's like old.
old and blonde. Yeah, that's like that's like one of our like, we used to say that all the time to each other. I'm trying to think of the other one. It's like, I don't know. It's so stupid.
And that's the film is funny. Like Bartok is like Brenda's spirit animal.
He's just such a mess. Like he's just a mess. It's
like when Rasputin's like, I can't get vengeance because I don't have my, like, I forget, like he was on like long how he got the mystical vial, and Bartok's like, you mean this old thing? Like he's like, how did you get that? He's like, I've had it for years.
Yeah, he's a mess. He's a walking disaster, and get that.
He's so well-meaning though.
I know. That's exactly what I mean. It's just, yeah.
He's like, Rasputin, he's like, maybe you shouldn't be so angry. Like, you got most of the Romanovs. Like, that's good enough, right? Like, like, just let it go. Just let go and let God. Like, and, like, yeah, Rasputin's like, no.
I love like, yeah.
And then give her a hot and a woo. And then I'd kick her, sir.
Just like the little,
and then I'd kick her, sir.
Which I think I've literally seen Brenda do. Just be like,
he's so
little
so much. Like he's just such a good boy.
Yeah. And Puka's so adorable. I love Puka so much.
I still love how Anya defeats Rasputin though by like stomping on that vial, right? She's like, this first of all, this is for Dimitri because you just hit him and I don't like that. And like, then this is for my family and this one's for me. And then like, Das Vidanya, and like crushes it like with her freaking high heel.
I know, and I know we've talked a little bit about like a lot actually on like her agency and her sense of independence, but like like going back to that moment where she defeats Rasputin on her own, can we talk about how like she's like she tackles him, she throws punches at him, she's kicking
she's like hitting him like,
and he's going at her with like just full force, but to see that on the screen is from this sort of princess type woman,
because Dimitri is like taken out instantly. Like he's like, oh, save you on, yeah, and then boom, like mystical magical flying horse thing takes him out. Like,
and then Rock hits him, and then he just passes up. Yeah,
he catches Anastasia, and she's like, I got it, and then like climbs up that like street, and then like fights Rasputin on her own.
But for like a princess type girl around the time that this movie came out, to see her fight back, it was so contradictory to like everything else that we've been exposed to at that point in terms of animated women, right? So it was, even looking back now, that's such an empowering moment where she's the one that saves Dimitri. He's a damsel in distress in this moment, right? Like, and she's the one kicking and punching back. Like she doesn't, even her look, right? Like she still kind of has a princess look, right? Because like she
just came from the ball, like she's trying to find Dimitri,
right? And like her hair is somewhat perfect, but like she is like her hair is a little bit out of order, right? Her dress is kind of torn, and she's not presenting like. And I think that's a good moment of education of like, when you're going to fight, if you need to fight, the last thing you're worrying about is how you look.
Is how you look, yeah. Because she's like, her goal was like, get Vile, destroy Vile, like get vengeance for family. Like, she's like basically saying the curse ends now, right?
And taking back that moment of that curse, right? Like in her stomping away that Vile, it's her ending that legacy, right? And I love that she did it.
Me too. I was like so into it. Like I stand.
But yeah, I love Anastasia.
Me too. It ends so great. It's
It's a good film. I hope that our discussion today has, I guess, inspired people to look into it. I was inspired, but now I'm a little scared because I don't know that I want to.
have a fortified heart, because it's dark, sad, unfortunate content. But it did actually happen, and it's I think very important to not gloss over that when loving a character that is based
Absolutely
on
agree.
a historical figure. Like you should know that going in, and you can enjoy it for what it is, but you have a fortify your heart.
Yeah, so it's the kind of thing that I really don't need to read right before I go to bed. At least that's what I've taken away from this, right? Because I don't want to have nightmares. But it is something that we should all look into. If you enjoy the movie, there is a stage production with a fantastic soundtrack. As we've already alluded to, the original soundtrack for the movie is fan-fucking-tastic, as is the stage production and the sound stage. The original Broadway cast also does a really good job on their own soundtrack. So do look into that. Next week, we are going to be discussing Merlin, the BBC series, and probably other iterations of Merlin, because as you all know by now, we cannot stay on topic. We always go off on tangents, but we always come back, right? We synthesize information for you. So do check out Merlin. It is available on Netflix, I think. So if you want.
But don't watch the last 2 episodes. It's a waste of your heart.
No, it really isn't. We have different we will have okay, so my opinion is completely the opposite of Tori's. If you saw his hand gestures, he very much hates the ending for Merlin, and I enjoyed it, and I think Jen is somewhere in the middle, probably. I don't know. We will see. We will talk about it next week. So thank you for joining us. Stay safe, wear your mask, and we'll see you all next week. Bye.